focus on creating the right environment to allow great things to happen. Like as a leader, it's not always about just having all the right answers. It's about just creating that atmosphere where people can be free to do great things and bring the skills and the strengths that they have to the table.
Be inspired, learn and grow from the experience of others. Welcome to the What I Know Now podcast with Mark Kelly.
My guest today is Jeff Caselden. Jeff is an expert in management and leadership, and I'm actually delighted to have him on the show. In today's interview, we'll discuss Jeff's background, setting up Amazon in Ireland, leadership, and also what Jeff's learned along the way. Jeff will also talk about fear, adversity, about how it can actually hold you back. And later we'll ask Jeff about some of the challenges he's had, maybe some of the regrets, and the advice he'd offer to his younger self. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mark.
So tell me a little bit about you and how you actually got to come from your States to come over to Ireland and actually set up Amazon.
Yeah, well, kind of a circuitous path, I suppose. I'm originally from Indiana, in the middle of the US, or as I like to call it, the Westmeath of America. I moved to Washington State, moved to Seattle when I was about 25, not long after I got married. Actually joined Amazon about 6 months after that. Started as a customer service agent in the company, having no idea back in 1999 what I was really getting myself into. Did that for a couple of years and moved into infrastructure with Amazon. Did that for a few more years and then had an opportunity to move down to the Bay Area. And so lived in San Francisco for about 4 years. Joined an Amazon subsidiary in Palo Alto, California called A9 that specialized in product search and advertising technology for Amazon. And was the first operations engineer for the search team, and did that for a few years as well as a little bit of other work in kind of the corporate IT space for that subsidiary, and then really had a hankering to move to Europe and to just see kind of what an international experience would be like for a couple of years. My first real trip abroad was in 2003. I went to the UK. I was just about 30. And just really loved the experience and just wanted to kind of get more of that. So had the opportunity to come to either Luxembourg or Dublin, visited both places, and as you can see, Dublin won out in the end. I've been here for almost 10 years now, and grew my own team, which was part of the search organization here. That was my mandate for coming over. So Amazon had gotten to be about 250, 300 people come, say, summer of 2013, I guess. And but we were facing some real challenges in terms of our growth here in Ireland. We expanded fairly dramatically even through the period of the economic downturn here. But you could kind of see the cracks in the facade starting to show. The way Amazon operates, it's a pretty siloed kind of organization. So you own kind of your vertical and your business, and you don't necessarily have to interact a whole lot with other parts of the business. Obviously, there's some interaction, but it's not super heavy. With the intent being to allow people to innovate faster and move. And we just weren't really kind of organized well for the size that we were at in Dublin, and we were starting to suffer a lot of really trivial kind of problems. Is there loo roll in the toilets? Is there washing up liquid in the sinks? And so I spoke with a number of my peers in the organization here in Dublin, some of my leadership back in the States, and really tried to advocate for us having a more centralized kind of form of leadership, so that it wasn't sort of a committee where we were all just kind of looking after our best interests, but we had someone that was kind of thinking about the longer term vision for the site and how we would grow from where we were then to where we wanted to be. So that summer I kind of took on the role as GM for Amazon here in Dublin. I did that for about 3.5 years. We grew the site from 250, 300 people to just under 1,300 or so by the time I left in late 2016. Our kind of vision was to create the technology hub for Amazon in Europe. And at the time, it seemed like a bit of a moonshot maybe, but if you look at kind of where the company's at today, I think the kind of plans that myself and the rest of the leadership team put in place have kind of started to come to fruition. They're close to 1,800 people now, and actually are one of the biggest technology hubs for Amazon globally.
And you see so many companies that want to scale, but they just go up and go down. They don't necessarily come together. How important do you think that leadership group was for actually setting that vision and collectively coming together to put that into implementation?
I think it was really critical because one of the challenges that we faced was we were growing at roughly 50% headcount growth year over year. So half the people at any given time really had no idea what it actually meant to be an Amazonian, you know. So our role as a leadership team, I think, was really important in terms of not only setting a vision and a direction for where we want to go, but also being kind of the role models to demonstrate what Amazon's leadership principles and their culture really meant. And the way that Amazon's leadership principles are written, there's a great deal of ambiguity and natural kind of conflict built into them. So I think our role was to kind of make sure that, you know, people weren't over-indexing on one versus another, and that there was a fairly balanced approach. Similarly, I think there was a really important need for us to be able to tell the story of what we were actually doing in Dublin, back to leadership in Seattle. There wouldn't have been, you know, Amazon doesn't come and build a really complicated management structure when it comes into a new country. It's pretty much, what's the business that's there, and you figure it out and make it work. So we had to do a lot of work in terms of, you know, pulling together what that story was, the direction that we wanted to go in, what we needed to get there, and really do a lot of kind of leading through influence. I had probably 40 different stakeholders back in the US that I kind of would have responded or had some sort of need to answer to as the GM. So it was a fairly complicated kind of structure.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the confidence to overcome maybe some fears or anxieties about taking up that type of role, and also trying to win the hearts and minds of all those different stakeholders.
What gave me the confidence really was like, it became a necessity in many ways. You know, I had picked up my life and moved to Ireland, you know, 5 years before. I was on the verge of getting citizenship myself. Like I'd kind of decided this was where I really wanted to be. And I was actually really proud of the team that I had built and what those guys had accomplished. And that was a hard thing to kind of want to walk away from just when things start to get sort of tough. So there was a little bit of a sense of, you know, I mean, in talking to some of my peers, we were all very busy with our own kind of thing. It wasn't necessarily something that any of us wanted to do. We all felt there was a need for it, but it was like, how do I do this with everything else that I have going on?
Yeah.
And I think I was fortunate enough, given my history in the company. I mean, I was the longest tenured employee at Amazon in Ireland at this point in time. So I was kind of, I guess, maybe known as a safe pair of hands. So there were people that were willing to give me an opportunity to try to make a difference. So there was a little bit of that aspect of, I didn't want to see this place falter in any way, because I was very invested in it personally as well as professionally. And similarly, it was just something, you know, that I wanted to experience. Like, you know, it's one thing to have a group of 20 people that you know quite well, and they know you on a very personal level, and leadership at that scale can be very fulfilling. But I really wanted to see what it was like when you've got, you know, 1,000 people that you're speaking in front of. So it was, and I think I had also just had, you know, a series of pushing myself out of my comfort zone through previous stages of my career, and this just kind of felt like the next natural progression. So
you've had the opportunity to work with some really, really cool startups and some established companies as well, which is really exciting. Tell me about some of the challenges or some of the areas that you feel that companies need to focus more on, as it's becoming a little bit of an impediment for their growth.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the principles that I kind of carry around with myself is that I feel like people are the most important part of any business. You know, it's very easy when you build a product or you build some sort of technology or service to think that that's actually the most important thing that you have. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, product and services are really important to your business, but ultimately, like, who buys those products or those services? Who builds them? It's the people that you bring into your organization. So I, you know, one of the things that I often see as a problem in a lot of really fast-growing companies is their selection process. There's not enough time in my mind spent on bringing people into your organization, really getting an understanding for not only what they're capable of from a functional sense, but how are they going to fit into your culture from kind of a behavioral standpoint. This was something we spent a great deal of time on at Amazon, and we didn't always get it right, but I think the approach that we took to it gave us a higher level of success than we might normally have. So I mean, I've met friends recently who've had job offers after virtually no interview, and to me that's just kind of a little ludicrous. I mean, there's a lot that can be made from a first impression, but really walking through some examples in someone's career of not only what they do, but how they've done it and how they've approached it and how they think through problems, especially when challenged with restrictions or limitations in terms of how they might normally solve it, I think gives you much more insight into how they actually think and how they're apt to respond in particular situations where there's not necessarily a clear path forward.
So very, very much focus on behavior-based interviews and being focused around that, and actually if you get the behavior right, then everything else will be correct after that. Yeah,
certainly if they behave in a way that's congruent with what the organization values, that you're apt to have less challenges. And I think going hand in hand with that, companies need to have a good sense of like why they exist, what's their purpose, what's the mission that they're on, and what are the values that guide them in achieving that. And that's something that some companies put a lot of effort into and maybe just pay lip service to it and don't actually really believe any of those things. I think it has to be something that people believe. If they can really see an alignment to that purpose that you've defined and you're creating, I think they'll do amazing things for you.
Yeah, I think Warren Buffett talks a lot about the most important trait that he looks for when he's hiring somebody is integrity. Because he said if you've got somebody who's very, very smart, but they haven't got integrity, you're in a lot of trouble very, very quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the timeline on which people think about things, and especially in a business context, needs to shift for a lot of people. If you're only thinking from quarter to quarter, you're going to take risks and you're going to do things that are going to make those results look good at the end of the quarter. But what's that really going to mean to you down the road, 2 years, 3 years, 7 years out? And that was something I think Amazon did really, really well, was they were just willing to take long-term bets on things that most other companies just aren't even willing to compete on that same kind of timeline. Yeah. And that's how things like AWS have become such, juggernauts, or has become such a juggernaut of a product for them, because there were very few other companies that were willing to sit there and see what's going to happen for 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's incredible. What 3 pieces of advice would you offer to people who want to improve this and they really understand that this is an issue for them?
Yeah, I think the first one that I would say is start using behavioral interviewing techniques and invest more time at the talent selection stage. I think it's really a make or break kind of thing that can totally bring your business forward. It can actually set you back quite a bit. Now, I come from the US where most employment's at will, so if you have someone that doesn't really fit, it's not as difficult to move them out of the organization. But in Ireland or in Europe, where there's certainly greater protection on worker rights, which I actually kind of think is a good thing, this is something that you have to really be on top of. You have to manage people effectively. And I think that's absolutely critical. The other thing that I think I would mention is increasing the importance of EQ and CQ in your leaders. It's not just all about intelligence or IQ, it's about their emotional intelligence and their cultural intelligence as well. I think the best leaders are the ones who can empathize with their staff and understand what they're going through. That was something that I didn't realize it was happening to me at the time, but I managed a team that was the job that I had done. So I knew how to do the job, which in many ways was really great because I could talk to my team and I understood exactly what they were going through. It was a setback for me in some ways though, because I didn't allow them the space to fail and to learn themselves, and too often, very early on, I just answered all their questions because I knew all the answers. Once I got away from that helped quite a bit.
I kind of figured out 2 years ago that geniuses ask great questions.
Absolutely.
And I spent a lot of my life trying to answer.
Yeah. And I think as well, given the more global nature of the world today, it's absolutely critical that people are able to bridge across cultures, because the office we had here had over 50 different nationalities in it. If you have a very blinkered kind of view of the world, it could be a real challenge for you going forward. And I think the third piece of advice I would offer is focus on creating the right environment to allow great things to happen. Like, as a leader, it's not always about just having all the right answers. It's about just creating that atmosphere where people can be free to do great things and bring the skills and the strengths that they have to the table.
And tell me a little bit about some of the challenges that you found being in your own business and coming from that big kind of juggernaut that you came before, and trying to build relationships with people where you're also kind of thinking long term.
I think one of the big challenges I learned fairly early on in starting my own business is that you obviously can't do it alone. And that was one of the things that gave me the courage to kind of do this to start my business as well, was that I had built a really great network of people in Ireland through the contacts I had with the IDA and the American Chamber of Commerce, and through the industry. So I had a little bit of a name for myself and some awareness, I guess, in terms of maybe what my background might be and how I can help others. So having that network was really critical, but it took me a little bit of time to figure out the things that I'm not really great at. I had some awareness of some of them, but when you're doing your own thing, and I'm in business, my wife is my business partner, and we're actually quite similar in terms of our strengths and kind of how we see the world. We realized quite quickly, some of the bigger picture conceptual thinking isn't always a strong suit for us. It's something we got to put a little bit more effort and energy to. We're very good at understanding what's happening and figuring out how to get from where we are now where we want to go. Similarly, selling and self-promotion, wouldn't be something I'm necessarily well versed in. I tend to be a little more introverted. I'd be a little bit more low-key in terms of how I try to present myself. But if you're starting your own business, like, you've got to tell people why you can help them and why you add value.
100%, the problem that you can solve, and ultimately help them get to the results sooner.
Absolutely. If you can't do that, you're dead in the water.
So you're sitting down, you're having a coffee or maybe a herbal tea with your 18-year-old self. What advice are you sharing?
This belief that there's like a different model of leadership out there, which isn't necessarily just bombastic, control-focused, brash. Growing up and earlier in my career, that was the type of leaders that I was often sort of surrounded by, and that never felt like a role that I could comfortably play myself. So knowing that it was okay as an introvert to kind of be authentic and true to myself and still be an effective leader was something I kind of wish I had known a little bit earlier, as well as the fact that there is a real value, albeit somewhat hard to measure, in people who can create that environment in which others can succeed and thrive.
Okay, brilliant. Jeff, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the What I Know Now podcast with Mark Kelly. To subscribe to the podcast, just enter WIKN into iTunes or any Android podcast of choice, or check out the website at www.wikn.co. We'd love to get your feedback, either positive or negative, about the episode and what action you're going to take. I look forward to seeing you next week, and remember, have an absolutely super day. Bye.